My name is Charles Rogel, and I am the Vice President of Products and Marketing for DecisionWise. I'll be the moderator for today's presentation. Our presenter today is Kristen Chapman.
Good afternoon.
Kristen holds an MBA and is a principal consultant at DecisionWise. She leads a team of consultants who administer surveys and deliver consulting and training to clients around the world. And she's worked with many clients to help them develop and leverage their employee value proposition. DecisionWise is located in Springville, Utah. We have been in business since 1996. We just celebrated our 20th year, our 20th birthday party. And we specialize in conducting employee surveys and providing organization development consulting. Over the past 3 years, we've experienced tremendous growth, and we were named to the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing private companies in the U.S. for the second year in a row. This webinar will last 60 minutes. Everyone's on mute. So if you have questions, please submit them using the question feature on the toolbar. This session has also been approved for 1 hour of recertification credit by both HRCI and SHRM. And after the webinar, I will send you an email with a link to the slides, as well as the activity codes for those credits. The slides and samples for the presentation are located in the handout section. So if you'd like to download them now, you just go to the toolbar, click on handouts, and you'll see those 3 PDF documents there to download. So to begin, let's talk about, let's provide, I guess, a poll question for the audience here. What we want to know are what job factors are most important to you in your current role or when considering a future role. So this allows you, let's see, I can't remember if this is a single choice answer or multiple choice, but I'm going to launch the poll and we'll get your responses and then talk a little bit more about it. So, for example, you're looking at taking on a new job or changing your role or even in your current role. What are the factors most important to you? And choose a couple, I guess, if it's allowing multiple. I think it's allowing multiple choices here. Choose a couple of those, and then we'll share the results with you so you can kind of compare what other people think as well. Looks like most people have voted. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results with you now. So what we're seeing is that, let me bring this open on our side, is that most people said work aligns with your interests, talents, and skills, and then making an impact came in second. Work schedule, challenging work assignments, and professional development opportunities kind of tied for third place out of all the responses.
Well, this is interesting. This is a similar type question that you might ask on an employee value proposition survey. What job factors are most important to your employees when you're considering, your current job role or a future job role? And then the idea of EVP, employee value proposition, is you try to understand that within your population, and then based on those kinds of responses, like we see here, work aligns with interests, making an impact, you just make sure that the experience that you're providing your employees supports what they most value in a job. And that's really the essence of EVP.
I'm going to go ahead and hide the poll then and switch back to our slides here. So let's talk about this definition then.
Yeah, so employee value proposition, it's actually something that's been around for a little while. But the concept, actually in the older days, you might have heard the term employer value proposition, so EMPLOYER, so employer. But in the age of the employee, which we're saying now, and we'll paint the case for you here, we refer to this as employee value proposition. It's basically the value an employee receives from an organization in exchange for the employee's work. Now, what do we mean by value? Well, value is what is useful or important. It's a fair return or equivalent in goods, services, money, or other for something exchanged. So
this is benefits, right?
No, it's not just benefits. And then, that's one of the misconceptions of employee value proposition. That if I go and give you more perks, and we'll again talk about this today.
Yeah.
If I give you more perks, Charles, or if I give you, more pay, that suddenly that contract between me as the employer and you as the employee is going to be satisfied. And the employee value proposition is actually looking at the holistic value. So everything from, things that I'm expecting based on my my interactions with, let's say things that you're expecting as a potential candidate when you first walk into my company, what you know about my brand, also what kinds of conversations we have on that job interview. You're building in your mind that there is this experience that's going to exist coming and working for me. And so the employee value proposition is understanding what is it that employees value and where are there gaps within what the organization says they do and what employees actually experience. We talk about work. So what does work mean? Work is basically the skills, capabilities, and experiences an employee brings to the organization. And again, one of the things to mention is that we are focused on employee, not employer. It doesn't mean the employer is not important in the equation, and we'll also refer back to that. But it's really that set of associations and offerings provided by an organization in return for the skills, capabilities, and experience that an employee brings to an organization.
So we break this out a little bit further when we talk about this employer or employment contract. We're familiar with this, I think, in terms of saying, well, here's the paperwork you need to sign when you join the organization and the expectations we have in terms of work hours and time off and all those different things. Well, there's really three components to this contract that's formed when an employee joins an organization. We call it the brand contract, transactional contract, and psychological contract. And we'll talk more about these, but these are essential to what you're trying to understand with your employee value proposition. The brand contract is really, and we're not saying that the product brand, like how your customers that buy your product view you as a brand. It's how your employees view your company as a brand or an employer brand. So you might have a reputation of being a fun place to work. Maybe you work really hard, or maybe it's you have lots of perks or different growth opportunities. So whatever your employees are seeing as the brand of your company, that's what's attracting them to apply and accept a position.
Often you see this on the website, right? On the come, join our team or be part of our company.
Yeah.
And so what is that message that you're sending to potential candidates? What is it that they hear from people who have worked at your company before? You have things like Glassdoor now, and other places where employees can rate, this is the experience I had working with, a particular company.
Yeah.
So all of that comes in to become what we call your brand contract from, again, as you said, the experience of the employee.
The next one is this transactional contract, and this is the one term I think we're most familiar with, which is the outward or the obvious expectations that an employee and an employer have about the work arrangement. So I'm going to get paid this much. Here's the benefits included within your employment. Here's your job description, what you're supposed to do. Here are the performance metrics that you're supposed to meet. All of those are kind of clearly outlined, hopefully, in most organizations. And we call this the transactional contract. Now that really helps to set the expectation an employee has of what they need to do to excel in their work.
What's interesting about the transactional contract is I think that most organizations think only about this. Mm-hmm. It's really, here's what's written down, here's legally what, you're committing to doing as an employee and what we're committing to provide you. And what we're saying is that in employee value proposition, you've got to look beyond that, because there are these brand components, and as you'll talk about in a second, these psychological components that are very much a part of the employee experience.
And the last one, the psychological contract, is really more about your culture or those factors that really drive engagement and performance. And so these aren't written down, but most of your employees, if not all, understand what the psychological contract is. So even if it's not written down that we expect you to work hard or do your best or be creative, you quickly pick up on that as you join the organization and notice your coworkers doing that, and notice how those unwritten motivators are there to accomplish those things.
If I were in an interview with you and you said, I'd really like to understand about what kind of opportunities you offer for growth, mm-hmm. and I were to say, oh, we do a lot around growth, we really want to help people feel like they're learning and being challenged and stretched in what they do, if you actually come and I hire you and you start and 3 months into the job or 6 months into the job, you're like, there's no growth here. There's not even a conversation about growth. That is part of the psychological contract, the expectations you had. Or even if I hadn't explicitly stated it, but it was in, part of the values that we, said that was part of our company.
Yeah.
So that's part of what we would call an example of what the psychological contract is. It's harder to control. It's harder to know because it can be a little unique for each individual. You come into an organization and you have certain expectations that you would like to, or certain things you'd like to get out of that experience. And this is where, in many ways, EVP comes in and helps us to understand a little bit more what does that psychological contract look like.
So what we're trying to do with your EVP is answer these 4 questions. So what does it take to attract the right people? What does it take to retain these people? What does it take to motivate them? And then what is your company's brand? And that kind of ties a lot of these together. And so if you're trying to attract, retain, and engage your workforce, this is the information that you'll be able to glean from conducting this process.
We'll talk a lot more about brand because this really, I think, is one of the key pieces of EVP, and one of the things that we look at as we're looking at EVP is how does what employees are expecting, especially our top talent, are expecting in our organization, how does that align with what they're actually experiencing?
So as we look at a few examples here, just give me an idea of what this might be for these different types of employers. As a potential employee or as an employee, I look at these logos and I have different ideas about what the employment contract might be as I join. So PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, large consulting firm. If I'm a recent college grad with an MBA and I get recruited to PwC, I know that I will probably be working 60 to 80 hours a week. I'll be traveling most of the time, be gone at least 4 days out of the week and on site at a client location doing work. And there'll be a high expectation for performance. So those might be some of the things that would worry me, but the upside here is that I will gain a ton of experience. I'll probably be there for 3 to 5 years, but I'll walk away understanding a good methodology and process for consulting and helping organizations. I'll probably also land a job with one of the clients that I was working with because that's actually good for PwC. They want to have their employees then work at some of the companies where they were consulting to deepen that relationship and that contract that they have with their clients. So that would be an example for PwC. If I was going to accept a position at Walmart, I'd understand that probably the opportunity to get hired, the barrier there might be pretty low. It might be pretty easy to get on, especially during the holidays to get on for part-time work. But that the pay might not be great, but at least I might have a flexible work schedule. It might work out as a second income for a home, and it might provide some benefits and opportunities for growth later on down the line. Google is another company that's exciting for young college graduates. They know they're going to work in a fast-paced environment, that a lot of their needs will be met if they work there. It's almost like moving from the college dorm to the Google dorm, because you can live on campus basically and have free food,
everything taken care of.
But they expect a lot of work from you. You're going to learn a lot of information. You might just stay there for a while so you can then go and start create your own startup. General Mills we include here because one of our consultants here, Brad Taylor, was the vice president of HR there for 30 years. And he describes the environment more as a real stable company. So you go to General Mills and you know you could probably work there for the rest of your life. It's one of those last types of companies where you can actually have a long career. And you know that you'll have good learning experiences. You'll be moving around probably from different organizations to the next, different facilities. But it's something you can really stay with and grow with and have a great career and a great environment to work in. So 4 very different kind of environments, but all offering a different brand, employer brand for those looking for jobs. So why does it matter? This is a good question. I think a lot of people struggle with this concept. What we're going to talk about is this changing environment, this changing workforce that we're seeing right now. And so The latest data that we've got from the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics shows hires, job openings, and quits. And you can see in the top right corner here that hires and job openings just crossed. And so now there are more job openings than actual hires than hires are occurring. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. But people can't hire quick enough. They can't. They've got more openings now, and they can't hire and fill those openings fast enough. And that's especially true here in Utah, where our economy is doing really well. Maybe not so much in the Midwestern states. And then quits are rising. People are seeing all these job openings. They're saying, hey, I don't really want to stay here, or maybe it's time for me to move on and find a better opportunity. And so the level, so people are more willing to now investigate these opportunities and take them on.
And you know, furthermore, Charles, you hear this terminology in our industry now, right? It's the war for talent.
Right.
How do we keep the best people? Because now that there are more jobs available, it's your top talent who has the opportunity to move. People are recruiting on LinkedIn like crazy. I mean, you have people contacting you much more frequently, especially if you are a high performer.
Yeah.
So how do you as an organization make sure that you can keep your top talent? And again, EVP is something that helps to address that, because you're understanding what is it that is most important to the people that I most want, you know, the job roles that are hardest to fill, and how do we align their employee experience needs with what we can offer as an organization. And so, again, as we asked that question at the beginning, you know, what is it that's important to you as a job factor in your job role? It's those kinds of questions that then allow us to align our strategies, our initiatives around people in a way that is able to address what's on the minds of your top employees.
So the other problem is that organizations are finding they can't hire, or they're having trouble finding enough of the right people. So the Corporate Executive Board did a study and showed that you know, there's 30 people on average applying for every job opening, but less than 20% meet the job qualifications. And so as you look at those 30 applicants, you know, you're dumping off, you know, you're only finding about 5 or 8 people out of that group that are really worth an interview.
And again, this points back to those who are most qualified in your organization will be the ones that can get the job that they're looking for.
The next item is about tenure. So as we look at tenure over a long period of history, again from the U.S. Department of Labor and Statistics, you'll see even since back in 1951, that blue bar at the bottom represents the new people entering the workforce, ages 25 to 34. Over that history, over that time, you can see that they spend on average maybe 2.5 to 3 years with an organization before they move on to another job. So that segment of the population has always been very mobile. They're starting out their careers. They're maybe looking to make a jump to either earn additional money or move to a new location. So, and they're willing to kind of take that risk. As we get older, you can see the older populations are more stable in their tenure. The next item shows that this population, especially in the United States, is growing. And so millennials, that young population that's so mobile, now make up, or now are the largest segment of the workforce in the United States. So 53.5 million millennials now are in the workforce. And so the issue we're finding is that because there's so many young people in the workforce, and because they're so naturally mobile, turnover is going to be higher in a lot of organizations as more and more young people are entering the workforce. And as we see this again, here's another comparison. You'll see the millennials now, the Gen Xers moved from 1995 up a bar, but the millennials are now the greatest, or the largest group compared to other generations.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation about this recently with the elections, wasn't there? The millennials actually didn't get out and vote in full force, but if they had, whatever their vote was would have been greater than the Xers and Boomers. So yeah, it's a pretty cool, you know, I guess power that this millennial generation has, and it's something important to pay attention to, and it's on the minds of a lot of the people that we're working with in terms of EVP.
Yeah, so if you see a lot of young people walking around your office building, there's a reason for that. There's more of them out there. You can't keep them out. So let's kind of change gears a little bit and talk about the primary goal of a business and how that's changed as well over time. And I'll let you talk about this one, Kristen.
Sure. So in the early days, if you've been to business school or had business classes, the first thing you learn is that the purpose of a business is to maximize profits for shareholders, people who own the company. And that was always talked about as kind of the primary focus of a business. But what we see is that over time, and this was where Peter Drucker in the 50s or so came out in the 60s and talked about, the primary purpose of a business is to maximize profit and for not only the shareholders, the owners, but also the stakeholders, the customers. Because his proposition was that it's customers who buy the products and services, and therefore focusing on the customers helps drive the bottom line. That's what helps maximize profits. What we've seen evolve over the last little while is this evolution beyond the customers. How are the customers most satisfied? Well, they're most satisfied because when they have a good experience in interacting with your company, with the organization. And who do they primarily interact with? Well, your employees. Yeah. And so it has been this evolution of realizing it's not all about just the shareholders, it's about the stakeholders. And the stakeholders including your customers, including your employees, and that is why this idea around EVP, how do we attract, engage, and retain the right people in our organization, because they're the ones who interact with the customers are the ones who drive the profits, and that's how we can maximize our profits as an organization.
So I want to launch another poll here to get a feeling for how you perceive how well your employee value proposition is working in your organization. So I launched the poll. Go ahead and take a moment to answer. This is a single response only, but do you have one? Is it there but not formally rolled out? Or number 3, yeah, we have it and we leverage it to attract and retain and engage our workforce. So we'll leave this open for a few more moments. Looks like most people have responded. I'll go ahead and share the results with the audience now. And so what we see is most people are saying no. It's close with those that say yeah, but it's not formally rolled out. We haven't really, we don't really leverage it. And then a small percentage are doing a good job with it. We're going to share with you some groundbreaking research on on what this your employee value proposition. And the truth of the matter is, and this was really a trick question, so I apologize, is that everyone has an employee value proposition. It's there whether or not you choose to call it that or roll it out or recognize it. Your employees know what it is. They have in their mind and understand what their value proposition is. Your job as an HR professional is to understand what that means to them, what their perceptions are, and then really try to either change it and mold it to what you want it to be to attract the right people, or to leverage it and use it to attract more of those good employees that you have. And so that's what we're going to talk about in the balance of our presentation today, is really how to go about doing that.
And we've kind of talked about this already, at different points so far in the last 20 minutes, but let me reiterate again. What is your employee value proposition? It is what people see when they first hear about your company. It's what other people tell them. It's what they look at when they look at your website and they apply for a job. It's their experience of applying for a job. And what does that feel like? For example, if you're one of those large companies that has this massive database where people send an email and then they never hear back, that's what they're experiencing. That's what they're understanding about your organization. Those who then are hired in your company, it's what they hear. It's the stories they hear of your culture. It's the values. It's your mission. It's what other people talk about with them, current or existing employees or past employees. It's what does the retail space or your manufacturing plant look like? What is the culture there? It's not only that first impression, but it's that full experience based on what do they expect going into the job versus how is it actually? What is it that they hear leaders talk about versus their actual experience on a day-to-day basis?
Well, some of the items where we say it's not, and I guess we should say it's not just, kind of a demographic profile. What we mean by that is it's just not a breakout of the different kind of tenure groups or functional groups that you have in the organization, what they might feel. It's not just your formal benefits like health insurance or 401ks.
Or the perks you offer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's not just your culture or values or employee engagement. All those things are kind of tied together or understood in the framework of this EVP, but it's not any of those individually.
And it's also not just employee engagement. I mean, it's all of these things factor in, like you say, Charles, but there's been a kind of a view out there that, for example, EVP is, okay, if we just change these satisfaction components like pay or PTO, then it's going to make employees happier. And what we know is that, you know, these psychological components that we talked about, meaning in what you do, the autonomy that you might expect to have, you know, the impact that you have, as we saw in that poll right at the beginning. You know, those are things that are part of that psychological contract. That is included in EVP. We talk about expectation symmetry versus expectation gap, and this is what EVP measures. Basically, as we craft a survey where we are trying to understand, you know, what is it that is important to people in their current role, as well as what it would be important to them in a future role. We look at where the gaps exist between their actual experience at the company and what they would prefer that experience to be. Now, it's not that we're going to align every single gap. That's not feasible for business, right? But if we understand what people want, and especially if we can look at certain groups and segments, say a key job role, or maybe it's your high performers, we're able to better align the initiatives, the changes that we make, if we understand that, and we can narrow that gap. We can get closer to having that expectations be aligned with the organization and the employee. So that's really what the focus is of EVP, is understanding the difference between the gaps that are there versus, you know, where could we get closer alignment.
So we list here, when we think of EVP, we think our minds typically go to this word of benefits. And benefits really isn't kind of an accurate statement. We think of this more as offerings or values. We don't use that too much. But there's the types we think about are usually these formal, tangible benefits, things that you know, are common in a workplace, like, you know, like I mentioned before, healthcare, 401ks, you know, even daycare, things like that. But as we look at this, so here's some examples. So here's what we typically see as the formal, tangible benefits. You know, your work schedule is included in there. We've got the formal, intangible. So these are things that people expect that you know, in any organization, I'd expect this to be in place, which is safety, respect, inclusion, and some protection as well, if need be.
And we call both of these formal because, you know, the intangible, it's not necessarily stated, but it's assumed. We're protected legally to be provided all of these things, right? Yeah. Formal, tangible are those things that are in that job contract that we talk about. So that's why we say these are more formal stated items.
And then informal, but still tangible, is what people experience, so their commute to work, what the office is like, their schedule, advancement opportunities, career building. So these might not be written down in any contract, but people still have expectations around these.
They may have been stated in an interview. They may be stated in materials that you provide. We've got this great leadership development program. We like to promote people a lot internally. And then the last is the informal, intangible. This is the one that is we often talk about, that kind of psychological contract. These are the things that are a little bit harder to know what each individual employee is looking for, but they're extremely important. Understanding, you know, how do they identify with the brand? We talked about meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. Those are those magic factors that we often refer to when we talk about engagement. What about the leadership style? You know, what am I expecting in terms of being mentored or supported by my leader? Job security, the culture, the relationships, alignment of values. And again, what's unique here is some of these are maybe stated in the brand or in some of the original materials that the employee gets, but they're more based on the conversations that are had, and also what does the employee come to your organization with a hope to achieve, or what's valuable to them individually. And again, for you, Charles, it could be that meaning is extremely important, and that's why you wanted to work at a place that was maybe a healthcare. But maybe for me, I'm looking for growth opportunities. So understanding that for individuals is part of that psychological contract that EVP measures.
So now, where do you start when you're trying to understand, some of these different offerings that are available to employees? There's a variety of ways you can collect this feedback. You can conduct a survey, you can do focus groups or one-on-one interviews. There's kind of a spectrum here. And really the thing that we recommend in terms of starting, though, is to start with a focus group. You want to explain kind of that process, Kristen?
Yeah, so if you just do a survey without any focus groups or interviews, the challenge is that you end up with a list of very tangible, formal things, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, we want to
everything we offer.
Yeah, exactly. And especially in HR, you tend to sort of, especially if your organization has more the generalist kind of transactional HR, you end up with this list of perks and benefits.
Yeah.
So what we recommend that you do is you think beyond that. What are some of the psychological components that we shared here in a minute, the informal, intangible things that are important, and what is the experience of employees? That is where you can find that information in focus groups and interviews. Asking them questions like, what's working for you here? Mm-hmm. What do you not like? Where are your frustrations? And you start to, from those, and conducting a good focus group, what emerges from that are those lists of values or benefits sought. What is it that people are looking for that they may not be getting? And what's interesting is a lot of times, especially if you phrase it the right way in those focus groups, they're not even going to go to the tangible perks and things. They're going to talk about their actual work experience. What we find is that things that attract people initially tend to be a little bit more tangible, but when they're actually in the organization, what keeps them are those psychological components that we talked about, the job factors. Am I making an impact? Yeah. Is my job actually in line with what I thought it would be when I joined, right? Those job expectations in that job role. Am I doing what I was expecting to do? Where are those gaps?
And so we've listed some questions here that are really effective in a focus group to kind of get the conversation going and to get that list built. And so once you have this data gathered from a series of different focus groups with your employees, now you can create a survey to really measure and prioritize which of these offerings are most important to your employees. And so I'll quickly show a sample survey here so you get an idea of how they work. But here we're saying, okay, let's rank the top 5 attributes that initially attracted you to the company. So if you're relatively new, this will be somewhat easy for you. So the potential, the work schedule was good, learning and development opportunities were number 1, opportunity to make an impact, and challenging work assignments. So you throw all those in, so people rank order those. Then they say, okay, well, which ones do you like most about your job today? Well, maybe it's the challenging work assignments, or went to number 1. Is that already number 1? And then opportunities to make an impact, innovative technology, whatever the case might be. But we see, like you said, Kristen, that those choices might change based on their experience once they're there. Mm-hmm. Here we have some things about the organization.
So let me just point out here, then we ask questions related to their current experience. Okay, yeah. So some of those factors that we mentioned before about growth and development or work schedule, how are they experiencing it? So what we look at is that what originally attracted them, what they most value, and now how does that pair with what they're actually experiencing? Yeah. Do they have a level of stress that's manageable? Are they satisfied with the growth? Does your job make good use of your skills and abilities? And this is where we go back to this expectation gaps and expectation symmetry. It's a very, very rich conversation. And you can see we do this for not only job factors, but we're going to, we talk about the organizational perspective, mm-hmm. maybe the team that you're working on and your relationship with your manager. And also then we do address formal benefits such as, pay and salary and, pay and benefits and perks and whatever the organization might offer in terms of rewards.
Yeah. And so here's kind of that one, and this is where most, I think, HR professionals start, is they say, well, let's just list all of our benefits and some potential benefits and see what people like, and then we'll maybe offer that next year.
And one of the things just to mention is that, pay and benefits, it's an important part of, obviously, of that contract with the employee. But our experience and our research shows, and those of you who have done engagement surveys probably know this as well, that just increasing someone's pay may not be the best way to motivate them. And so, we call it a satisfaction element. It's foundational. You've got to have the right kinds of pay and benefits, and especially when you're trying to attract top talent, you have to consider all of those factors and what's the competition offering. But if you're fairly equal there, it's not those things that are going to keep someone long term. It is their experience in working at the organization. It's why did they originally come? Are they doing what they want to do? Do they feel like they're making an impact? Those are the factors. And so that's why we kind of have a combination of questions that get us that comprehensive view of the employee experience.
So once you've gathered this data, and it's a pretty comprehensive way to populate or to gather information from your employees, and you can do this with one segment of your population or the entire segment or the entire population. The reason being is maybe there's we'll share a case study later where the bulk of the organization is made up by software engineers, and so they're very concerned about that population. And they really want to understand, okay, what about this population is unique or not, and how can we best retain these folks and attract more people like them? And so this is where you get into segmenting the employee population by different demographic groups, their level or position, and then the offerings or benefits.
Let me just mention here right now, in this process, there's kind of two ways to approach the segmentation. If you are an organization that already knows who your key talent is, meaning we have these 3 key job roles. You use the example of software engineers. Let's say we have, software developers and UX developers and maybe some back-end database. Maybe those are our key talent roles in the organization. Then you already know what those segments are that you're going to be looking for. And we take the results of the EVP and not only look overall, this is what our overall EVP is, but we can drill down and look at, okay, what is this segment number 1, our software developers? What is it that's most important to them? How do we number 1, attract the right people? And are we doing a good job with that? And then second, how do we keep the ones that we have here long term? Now, if you don't have these segments figured out, and the best example I can use is Starbucks. Starbucks was trying to figure out how do we keep our baristas. Our baristas are an important part of who Starbucks is, what our brand is, and so they surveyed all of their employees, and they were able to determine what were the key factors or what were the key segments of people that they had across Starbucks. And so, for example, they may have found that we have a lot of working students who kind of do this part-time, but they found that there were some of those students who were very interested in eventually becoming a full-time barista and working long-term at Starbucks. Yeah. And so they were able to create an employee value proposition that catered to those certain people that would bring them then into the organization and build that talent pipeline.
So I'm showing a sample report here that is usually customized. And so this is the hard part, is really determining, okay, what are these groups? How are these people kind of falling out into different buckets? And do we have some clear segments that we can define? So usually you'll be able to define, you want to get to a point where you're defining about 75% of your employees in that group into different segments. So here we're showing 4 profiles. And there's probably 25% of the people that don't fit into any one of these. They're somewhat unique. But generally, you'll see these profiles, and then you'll be able to understand which is the largest profile and how to focus on these. Maybe you end up with 2, maybe you have 3, just depends on your organization. But the idea is that you're trying to find what is unique about these people, what differentiates them compared to the other groups. And so as we look at, for example, profile number 1, what attracted them to the organization was the work, opportunities, and the company brand name. For profile number 2, it was also the work and the opportunities, but they were also incented by the total rewards they would receive. And then you can kind of see it varies just a little bit between these different groups. And so there's a little bit of variation in what attracted them. What's committing them has more variation. So recognition, the rewards and opportunities. Here's the work I do. Recognition's last. Some people don't even have recognition in these other two groups. So now we're saying, okay, well, what's unique about these people and their needs? Let's look at profile number one. There's some unique differentiators that come out of the data. You can see the attract and commitment items. You can see their demographics as well, the age group for the most part, their commute, things like that. So you try to pull out some of these unique differentiators for this segment and understand the kind of the psychological reasons why they work here and what motivates them. One interesting thing you can do is then say, okay, let's look at this attract, retain, and motivate or engage spectrum. What are the things that really attracted them? Well, there's some overlap here. There's career growth, personal growth, flexibility and location over here in the attract range. With recognition, with retain, it's about recognition and flexibility, and motivation has some overlap as well. So you see that career growth and personal growth overlaps all three of these areas, and so again, that's something that you want to focus on entirely within the organization. The next item are, looking at some of the job factors, career opportunities. What they say about career opportunities. They like working with innovative technology and having opportunities to make an impact. They scored 15% lower on base pay as a high performers. In other words, they're not as satisfied with their base pay. When we looked at brand recognition, location, these were important factors as well. So you can kind of see the favorable scores about feeling like they belong, their team members, the area they live in. So we get a lot of detail as we start honing in on this particular profile and what is important to them. So and this almost might be too much information to work with. So
yeah, sorry, it's a little overwhelming.
Yeah, you're tempted to look at this and say, well, where do we even start? Well, there's some obvious things that rise to the top in terms of what you need to focus on here. Attractive. And I'll go back to this chart above, which are career growth and personal growth are two big things. And so there's definitely some ways you can address how to both retain and attract this population. Especially if you know that, hey, profile number one, we have a lot of our top performers in that profile, so we really want to attract that type of person to our organization. So let me skip back over to the slides here and kind of give you an overview of the process. So we've already talked about number one, we actually didn't talk about number one, analyzing your existing data. You have a lot of this information already. Kristen touched on your website, your mission, values, and promises made. What are those, and do those align with your workforce and your culture? Are you living up to that? But you also probably have some data on onboarding, exit surveys, maybe even existing employee surveys that you can pull from. You can conduct focus groups. And then, in fact, number one will help you design the questions for your focus group and really get into those. And then number three is really developing that company-wide survey. Then you get to the next stage, which is taking the data and doing the analysis. So phase two is number one doesn't make it seem that hard, but this is the hard part, is really breaking those people out by groups, understanding where the gaps are and what you need to improve. And then the second part here of phase two is really understanding what the employee wants and what you can offer as an employer. So are you aligned, and where's the misalignment, and what brand do you want to live up to, and how are you going to focus and market that in the future?
So most organizations I work with, as we are looking at their current EVP, it is looking at that. Here's what we currently say we are, and now that we have this feedback from our employees, overall, again looking overall, here's what employees are saying that they value. So where are we aligned, and where are we not aligned? Furthermore, are there some pieces in there to understand about their current experience? They may value something, but their current experience doesn't give them that experience that they value. So you can do that overall, and then what we often do is we break it into these segments like we were just showing you for kind of key talent groups or key job roles. And determining this future EVP becomes that conversation, not only with the larger organization, so maybe your executive team, looking through the lens of both the employee and the employer. Here's what employees are asking for. We have a business to run, and this is what's feasible for us to actually provide. Where do we align that? Where do we kind of narrow those gaps, and how do we communicate that out to people? Not only for existing employees, but also as we start to try to attract or continue to attract new people, what's the message that we want to put out there? Is it currently in line with what software developers, for example, are looking for, in a job? And so this is the part that it's a lot to do internally, but this is where you have, what DecisionWise can offer, for example, is like a pretty robust analytics tool where you can dig into this data and then, get some guidance on how do we create these segments and what's our process for creating this EVP. It has such a positive and widespread impact if you can do this the right way. It affects how you market and recruit. It affects how you, how you strategize and what you come up with around your people management. It impacts that larger strategic plan that the organization may have. It impacts your website and how you put yourself out there to, prospective employers, and even out, to other stakeholders or even shareholders. What is it that we're known for as an organization?
So let's talk about a case study here. We've labeled this perks parity or parity. And what we're showing is some data from a client that we worked with in terms of their survey data. We asked, when the employees were asked to rank some of the rewards or requests that they had.
So they knew that they wanted, and these were things that you have to be real careful of, right? Because you don't want to put something out here as an option if you're not behind being willing to do it.
Yeah.
But these were the 5 items that the organization said, look, these are some rewards. Again, we're only talking rewards here. We're not talking other factors that we would be willing to provide as for our current employees, as well as a strategy to attract new employees. And so what was interesting about this is that they ranked these, and this is the order that they selected. So the on-site gym was the most important. Overwhelmingly, people said, we want an on-site gym.
And then, flexible work, sabbatical program. So these were issues or things that came up, and then they said, no, what do they really mean by flexible work and more PTO and things like that? These are, kind of common things. What they found and the changes that they implemented was, number one, they did put an on-site gym in. They were debating about doing that, and they had a competitor close by that had one. So they wanted to make sure that they were kind of keeping up and honoring this request. And it wasn't that expensive for them, and it also showed that they listened and did something kind of big. They can get a lot of traction for this one. But the ones that were probably more impactful were the next ones, where they came up with some flexible work arrangements, flexible PTO, and then the fourth item here is a little bit different than what we showed. It was about career development meetings.
The career development meetings came about because one of the factors things that they discovered, and this is all the same organization that we're mentioning, it was a technology company, and that people really believed in the success of the future success of the company, but they didn't see how they fit into that long-term company strategy.
Yeah.
And so career development came out as something to really focus on as a way to retain people in the long term.
So flexible work arrangements was interesting because people were saying, hey, listen, I'm an engineer. I don't necessarily need to be at my desk all the time to do my job or be here from 8 to 5 when everyone else is. So they allowed some flexible scheduling. They allowed some working from home, but it was all up to the local manager to do this. And so they kind of rolled out a new policy around this, and it was accepted very well. What they found, though, is not many employees took advantages of those changes, but they appreciated having the autonomy now to do so in the future. Flexible PTO was interesting because that's where that sabbatical idea came in. What they found is that when it came to PTO, many people were not taking their time off, and so they built up over years and years a number of days, maybe close to 100 days of PTO for some people over a number of years that were not being used, and it was kind of a badge of honor to have this accrued PTO. management looked at it and said, oh yeah, that's a good person. They're here working all the time and not, off taking vacation. And what the problem was is that was not, so employees kind of had a generous PTO program but felt like they could never use it. And so that was a detriment, and that was kind of hurting the value that employees had around this concept. So they changed it. They said, listen, you can take up to 5 weeks of PTO at one time. If you have a lot accrued, you can do that, and you're also going to be encouraged to have a lot of PTO. In fact, they made a cutoff to say you can't accrue more than, I believe, 5 weeks of PTO.
So it's kind of that mini sabbatical that
yeah.
they were considering. People wanted a longer term than just a week here or a couple of days there, but in the current policy, they weren't able to do that.
So it was more of a change in mindset and culture for the organization to say, hey, listen, we value PTO and we want our employees to take it, and we know it's important for them. So we're changing this idea of, the guy with the most PTO, has the most points basically in the organization. So based on those changes, the results were pretty significant. They reduced their turnover by 50%. So it was at 10%, they went down to 5%, which is actually still much better than the industry average of 13%. Like I said, they changed that culture around PTO, and then they increased that sense of autonomy people had from their flexible work schedule. And so these are, in some cases, some minor changes that really made a big difference in the minds of the employees.
What was interesting is a couple years later when we re-surveyed this population and did another EVP survey and asked, what's important, what is most important in these recent perks rewards that you've received.
Yeah.
And so here's what we found is that the dark purple at the bottom is very important. The middle purple is important, and the top is not important. So as you'll remember before, we saw that what the employees most valued was that on-site gym.
Yeah.
But what we see as most important to them now was that PTO, that organization saying, look, we value your time off. We want you to be able to have that.
Yeah.
And also we value the flexible work, the flexibility that you should be able to have in your job role. So these were, again, recent rewards, and we're, again, just talking rewards, but these are things that just showing you the difference between what employees say they want versus what actually makes the most difference to them. That's part of that conversation when it comes to EVP. It's not just those very, very tangible things. Sometimes it's other components like flexibility and autonomy that play into some of the strategies that you should employ in your EVP.
So let's talk about kind of another example or case study in essence. We're looking at REI, the sporting goods store.
REI is a pretty cool organization to me when I study and work with organizations on EVP, because they figured this out, right? They figured out what is it like to work, how do we attract the right people to our company to work? What kinds of experiences do we want to give them? What does that employee experience look like? They have figured that out in a really clear way. And in fact, if you go on their website, they have images of employees actually, as part of their marketing, doing different things like, riding on a kayak in the middle of Washington somewhere, or hiking a mountain in Europe, right?
Yeah.
And these are actual employees. And so it's an example of where they figured out what is that employee value proposition, and how do we implement that in the right way. One of the most recent things they did is, and this was a pretty big move on their part, I believe it was just this last year, Black Friday. Did they do it again this year?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so on Black Friday, it was in 2015, they just decided to get rid of it being a day that employees come and work. They closed offices and said, look, it's the day after Thanksgiving. Our employees have been spending time with their family. We want them to go and be able to do that and not have to work on Black Friday. So, a huge move, but what is the result of that? Well, the result of how they understand the employee experience and they value it, and they communicated this, that their voluntary turnover is at a low 6%. I think the National Retail Association industry average is 74%.
Yeah,
so that voluntary turnover is very, very low. They have ranked in Fortune's 100 best companies to work for since 1998. You know, their message is we inspire, educate, and outfit for a lifetime of adventure and stewardship. And you know, really they have just this real great focus on the employee value proposition, and they're not. It goes into all parts of their business. It spreads into all parts of their business in a way that you know what you're getting. When you join REI as an employee, you know what to expect, and there's more of that alignment in terms of the employee experience.
So to conclude, in terms of leveraging your employee experience, you really want to identify those candidates that fit your EVP. So understand what it is, and then interview and find those people that fit. Retention, you want those individuals to you know, who work there by adding value to the proposition that's already offered. So this could come in a couple ways. One is maybe you increase some of your benefits. You take some quick wins there. The other is communicating and helping them understand what they have and how you are better maybe than other organizations. And then for engagement, it's really understanding that, making sure you're in line in terms of your contract and understanding what really motivates your employees. What are the drivers of engagement for your employee population, and focusing on increasing those. And lastly, you really want to develop your employee value proposition to meet and target your talent needs. And so it fits your long-term business strategy. This is where, and this takes years to do, right? So if you're finding that, hey, you know, we're hiring maybe a lot of, you know, college graduates, for example, and we just do that because there's a university next door to our organization. But is that really the population we need, or do we need more experienced people, or even less educated people for some of the positions that you have open? So it's understanding and being deliberate about who you're hiring and why, and what profiles they fit to really be successful in your organization.
And then adjusting your employee value proposition that not only considers, you know, you got to run as a business, you know, you have to make money,
yeah.
And it's not only about what people want, but we can, if there's ways that we devote those dollars to align more on the experience that they are looking for, especially as you segment those top talent or those key job roles.
Yeah.
Then you just get closer at aligning that employee experience in a very positive way. And again, that's one of those things that can really make you that kind of great place to work that people want to come to, as well as keep the talent that you do have that you want to keep.
I mean, it's a big responsibility. I mean, employees are the number one, or the biggest expense, I guess, if you want to say it, when you're looking at your balance sheet. You know, salaries and benefits are by far the biggest expense for most organizations, and so you really need to make sure you're leveraging it and managing it the right way so that you're getting optimal performance. Well, if you have questions, if you'd like to get pricing and understand what this might cost for your organization, let us know. I can provide you that information. We can talk about what you've done in the past and maybe you know, modifying that or improving upon that, building upon that. The codes for HRCI credit and SHRM credit are there on the bottom left. I'll also send you an email with a link to those so you can redeem those and the samples that we shared with you today. I want to thank everyone for attending, and thanks, Kristen, for the presentation.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.